They say the gods of Olympus watched in silence as Rome rose from the west, a storm of iron and discipline that would one day devour the cradle of civilization itself. Greece, the land of philosophers, poets, and warriors, the teacher of the ancient world, bowed not to a single man, but to a relentless idea, Rome. This is the story of how the student conquered the master, and how the legacy of Greece became the soul of Rome. In the centuries before Christ, Greece was already a fractured jewel, brilliant but shattered. The glories of Athens and Sparta were fading into legend. States that once stood proud under the banners of philosophy and freedom were now trapped in endless wars, political schemes, and the arrogance of the past. Macedon, once ruled by Alexander the Great, the conqueror who had stretched the Greek world from Egypt to India, was now a shadow of its empire, fractured by greed, betrayal, and the weight of ambition. And in the west, Rome was rising, a republic forged not in poetry, but in blood and stone. Its legions marched under the standard of the SPQR, Senatus Populus Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, a symbol not of gods, but of men who believed they were destined to rule the earth. At first, Rome looked eastward not with envy, but with curiosity. They admired Greece's art, its philosophy, its gods. Yet admiration often becomes appetite. The Romans were pragmatic. They took what they respected and turned it into power. Greek culture was a treasure, but Greece itself, a prize. It began subtly. Trade, diplomacy, alliances. Greek cities appealed to Rome for help in their endless internal conflicts, and Rome, ever the opportunist, obliged. The Republic sent legions under the pretense of peacekeeping to protect one ally from another, but behind this illusion of friendship lay the machinery of conquest. The first step came in 214 BC, the First Macedonian War. Rome, fresh from her victory against Carthage in the Second Punic War, turned her attention to the east. Macedon, under King Philip V, had allied with Hannibal, Rome's sworn enemy. That was enough. Rome struck, not out of vengeance, but out of fear. Fear that Greece might unify again. Fear that another Alexander might rise. Rome's legions crossed into Illyria, clashing with the Macedonian phalanx, the same formation that once dominated the world. But times had changed. The phalanx was a wall, proud but rigid. The Roman legion was a machine, flexible, disciplined, deadly. The war ended inconclusively, but a door had opened. Rome had entered Greek politics, and it would never leave. 2 decades later came the Second Macedonian War, the true beginning of the end. Rome declared itself the liberator of Greece, a liberator with swords drawn. At Cynoscephalae in 197 BC, the Roman consul Titus Quinctius Flaminus met Philip V on the field. The phalanx stood like a silver sea of spears, gleaming under the Thessalian sun. The legions advanced, not as a mass, but as waves. The Roman maniples flowed through the gaps in the terrain, turning the rigid Macedonian lines into chaos. When the dust settled, Macedon was broken. In a grand display, Flaminus declared the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games. The crowds erupted in joy. The Romans, they believed, were their saviors, the new champions of liberty. But liberty, as Rome defined it, was submission in disguise. Greece was now a protectorate, not yet conquered by sword, but bound by gratitude, debt, and Roman law. The Senate smiled, and the chains tightened quietly. And yet the Greeks, proud and intellectual, began to influence their conquerors even as they fell under them. Roman nobles sent their sons to study in Athens. Greek tutors filled Roman villas. Greek statues adorned Roman temples. The Republic began to wear a Greek soul. It was as though Greece, in its fall, had found a way to conquer Rome spiritually. But peace never lasts long when empires hunger. A new threat emerged in the east. The Seleucid Empire, ruled by Antiochus Ephes, the so-called King of Kings. The Greeks, fractured as ever, called upon Rome again for protection, and again Rome answered. In 190 BC, At the Battle of Magnesia, the legions met the vast eastern army of Antiochus, elephants, phalanxes, archers, and chariots clashing against the disciplined steel of Rome. The outcome was decisive. The Seleucids were crushed, and Greece became Rome's gate to Asia. But there were those who saw through the illusion. The Achaean League, the last federation of Greek states, defied Roman orders. They believed they could reclaim their independence. Rome responded with fury. In 146 BC, the Roman general Lucius Mummius marched on Corinth. The city, once the beating heart of Greek commerce and culture, was obliterated. The men were slaughtered, the women and children enslaved. Corinth burned for days, its treasures, its art, its soul, all taken to Rome. That same year, Carthage was destroyed in the west. Two ancient worlds, Greece and Carthage, fell in the same breath. Rome had no rivals left. But some whispers claim there was something else behind these conquests, something darker. That deep within the archives of the Vatican, long before they bore that name, records speak of lost Greek texts seized during the sack of Corinth, manuscripts that detailed forbidden philosophies, teachings of the mystery cults, and fragments of ancient prophecies long erased from the public record. Could it be that Rome's conquest of Greece was not merely about power, but about knowledge? Knowledge that once questioned the divine order itself, teachings from the Orphic mysteries, the Pythagorean brotherhoods, the ancient cults that spoke of the immortal soul, reincarnation, and divine unity. Knowledge that the early Roman elite, and later the Church, deemed too dangerous to survive. Even today, the Vatican's secret archives, now called the Apostolic Archive, are said to hold fragments of those lost Greek works, scrolls written in fading ink, describing the rituals of Eleusis, the hidden language of the oracles, and the forbidden rites that predated even the Olympian gods. But what truth lies behind those locked doors? Were these teachings destroyed or quietly preserved to shape doctrines yet unborn? Rome conquered Greece on the battlefield. That much is history. But perhaps Greece conquered Rome in spirit, philosophy, and faith. For when the empire of Rome rose to its greatest heights, it did so with the mind of Greece, the reason, the rhetoric, the art, and the myth. And in that fusion, something new was born. An empire not just of soldiers, but of symbols. In the ashes of Corinth, the Roman generals walked among the ruins, and one of them is said to have whispered, "All this will one day be Rome." He was right, but he did not foresee that the greatest victory of Rome would also be its curse. For by absorbing Greece, Rome absorbed its doubt, its questioning of gods, its love of knowledge, and in time, that curiosity would erode the very faith that once made the legions invincible. The torch of civilization had passed, not extinguished, but transformed, from Athens to Rome, from marble to marble, blood to blood. Yet one question remains. Was it truly conquest or inheritance? Because somewhere beneath the stones of Rome, beneath the dust of libraries and catacombs, perhaps the soul of Greece still breathes, whispering that the empire that claimed to rule the world was, in truth, ruled by the mind of its fallen teacher. As the dust of Corinth settled, Rome stood as the unquestioned master of the Mediterranean, but victory brought more than spoils. It brought ideas. The legions had crushed the Greek armies, but the minds of Greece had begun to seep into the veins of Rome itself. And slowly, silently, the conqueror became the disciple. The senators, who once prided themselves on rustic virtue, now decorated their villas with Greek statues. They quoted Plato in the Senate and recited Homer at banquets. The gods of Olympus crept into the Roman pantheon. Zeus became Jupiter, Aphrodite became Venus, and Ares took the name Mars. The Republic, forged in the discipline of the sword, was beginning to drown in the beauty of Greek thought. Philosophy, art, and literature poured into the eternal city like rivers of gold. Greek slaves, scholars, teachers, scribes became prized possessions. To own one was to possess wisdom itself. The philosopher Carneades once came to Rome as an ambassador and delivered a speech on justice. The next day, he argued the opposite, proving that truth could be twisted by intellect. The senators were both fascinated and horrified. Rome had learned the Greek gift, and its curse the power of doubt. Yet beneath the cultural exchange lay something darker. Ancient Greece had always been a land of mysteries, not just in the sense of riddles, but in sacred secrecy. The Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter and Persephone, the Pythagorean brotherhoods that swore oaths of silence, the Orphic hymns that spoke of divine rebirth. These cults claimed to hold truths that defied both gods and men, truths that whispered of immortality, of the soul's descent and return, of cosmic order. When Rome conquered Greece, it took more than marble and manuscripts. It took possession of these mysteries. Some were integrated into Roman religion, others buried, but a few vanished entirely. Centuries later, when Christianity began to spread through the empire, the Church would borrow heavily from this Greek inheritance, from its language, its philosophy, its structure of thought. The Gospels themselves were written in Greek. The early fathers of the Church, Clement, Origen, Basil, all Greek thinkers who wove the faith through the fabric of Hellenistic logic. But what of the texts that did not fit? The lost Gospels, the writings of heretical sects, the teachings of Gnostic sages who claimed that true salvation lay not in faith, but in knowledge. It is said that when the library of Pergamon and the scrolls of Corinth fell into Roman hands, certain writings were quietly sealed away, not destroyed, but hidden, protected, or perhaps suppressed. The same knowledge that once shaped the philosophers may have been deemed too dangerous for the empire of faith that would one day rise in Rome. In the halls of the Vatican Archives, a place more ancient than its name suggests, there are rumors of Greek papyri still bound in bronze. Texts said to contain dialogues between lost philosophers, fragments of pre-Christian rituals, and early cosmologies that describe the universe not as the creation of gods, but as an eternal mind. These ideas, if true, would have threatened both the old Roman order and the Christian one that followed. The Church that inherited Rome's power could not allow such voices to survive. And yet, perhaps they did. Hidden away beneath layers of stone, guarded by centuries of silence, some historians speak of the hidden continuity. The idea that Rome's victory over Greece was not an erasure, but a transfer of sacred guardianship. The temples of Delphi fell silent, but their spirit lingered in the basilicas. The oracle's cryptic messages transformed into prophecy. The philosopher's search for truth became theology's search for God. It is almost poetic, the conqueror preserving what it feared most. By the time of Augustus, the first emperor, Rome had become both empire and heir, ruling the world with a Greek mind and a Roman will. The city of Romulus was now the stage upon which the drama of both civilizations merged. The poets of the age, Virgil, Horace, Ovid, sang in Latin, but dreamed in Greek. Their myths were Greek stories wearing Roman masks. Their gods were Greek deities renamed for empire. Yet with this blending came an invisible transformation, the ancient line between the human and the divine blurred. In Greece, gods walked among men. In Rome, emperors became gods. The divine right of kings, the sacred emperor, the idea that the ruler is chosen by heaven, all were Greek in origin, perfected by Rome. And still the shadows deepened. Whispers among later chroniclers, some in monasteries, others in forbidden sects, claim that Greek seers once prophesied Rome's rise, that the oracle at Delphi had spoken of a new power, born of iron, that would carry the flame of Olympus across the world. They say those prophecies were recorded, hidden, and later seized when the archives of Greece were looted. If they exist, they may rest today beneath Vatican walls, bound in dust and secrecy. Perhaps that is why the Vatican Archive remains one of the most restricted places on earth, not merely because it contains political records, but because it shelters truths that could rewrite the origins of Western civilization. What if, hidden within those vaults, are the last surviving echoes of Greece, the unwritten pages of Plato, the forbidden rituals of Delphi, the original Orphic hymns that spoke of the one light before time began? Such ideas would challenge not only the empire that was Rome, but the faith that succeeded it. Because if Rome conquered Greece with the sword, and Greece conquered Rome with the mind, then perhaps, deep beneath the marble and gold of the Vatican, their struggle still continues. Not in war, but in silence, a silence so profound that even history has forgotten its echo. And so, as we look back upon that conquest, that union of might and mind, we must ask what truly survived, the empire of Rome or the soul of Greece. The line between them was never clear. It was drawn in blood, erased by time, and rewritten in faith. And somewhere beyond the reach of scholars and popes alike, perhaps the ancient philosophers still whisper, that knowledge can never truly be conquered. When Rome's empire reached its zenith, it no longer needed to conquer with armies. It conquered with ideas. The same ideas it had once stolen from Greece now became its weapon of dominion. Philosophy turned into law, myth transformed into faith. The marble columns of Athens found new life in Roman temples, and the wisdom of the philosophers was absorbed into the rhetoric of emperors. Rome had learned from Greece how to rule not just bodies, but minds. But power founded on knowledge is never secure, for knowledge asks questions, and questions breed rebellion. In the centuries that followed, as emperors became gods and senators bowed in worship, a new philosophy began to rise from the ruins. Christianity, it spoke not of Zeus or Apollo, but of one God, one truth. Yet beneath its words lay Greek thought. The Gospel of John began with the phrase, "In the beginning was the Logos," logos, a Greek word meaning reason, order, divine wisdom. The very heart of Greek philosophy became the cornerstone of a new faith. Was it coincidence or a quiet inheritance? The Church Fathers, men like Clement of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, and Origen, all trained in the Greek schools of logic and rhetoric. They quoted Plato as easily as they quoted Scripture. They saw in Christ the fulfillment of Socratic truth, a divine reason incarnate. Christianity did not destroy Greece. It resurrected it in a new form, but resurrection always comes with a price. As the centuries passed, the church grew powerful. Rome's temples became churches, its libraries, monasteries, its senators, bishops, and within this transformation, the ancient Greek world faded, not erased, but hidden behind a new mask of holiness. The temples of Apollo were sealed, the oracle of Delphi silenced, and the old mysteries outlawed. Yet, it is said, some knowledge was not lost, it was taken. Hidden within the Vatican's labyrinth of archives lie documents older than the empire itself. Shelves that stretch for miles, holding papyri written in Greek, Latin, Coptic, and Hebrew. Among them, so the whispers go, are forbidden scrolls describing the Orphic mysteries, early Gnostic Gospels, and Greek treatises that challenge the nature of God and man. One such legend speaks of the Codex Hermetica, a lost collection of writings blending Greek philosophy and Egyptian mysticism. It taught that divinity lies within, that man himself mirrors the cosmos. The Church would have called it heresy, but some believe fragments of these works were recovered after the fall of Corinth, smuggled to Rome, and sealed beneath what would become the Apostolic Archive. If true, then Rome did not merely conquer Greece, it buried it alive, and yet perhaps not to destroy, but to preserve. History has a strange way of keeping its secrets. When the Renaissance dawned over Europe, it was not a Roman awakening but a Greek one. Scholars in monasteries began to rediscover ancient texts, Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, manuscripts copied by monks who barely understood their meaning. The spark of Greece flared again through the ashes of Rome. Even the architects of the Vatican itself drew their inspiration from the symmetry of Athens. Michelangelo's dome rose upon principles written by Vitruvius, a Roman who had studied the Greeks. Every arch, every column, every fresco carried the ghost of a civilization that had refused to die. And so the cycle continued. Rome conquered Greece with power. Greece conquered Rome with knowledge. And in time, that knowledge became the cornerstone of the faith that ruled the Western world. But some truths remained too dangerous to reveal. Beneath the Vatican, beyond the locked gates guarded by silence, lie rooms that few men have ever entered. Documents sealed under the authority of popes, labeled in ancient tongues. Some speak of political intrigues, others of older things, fragments of prophecies, philosophical dialogues that speak of the divine as light and vibration, gospels that portray Jesus not as a Messiah, but as a philosopher of divine reason, an echo of Socrates reborn. Perhaps that is why the Church guards them so fiercely. For if the world saw how deeply Greek thought runs through the veins of faith, how much of the pagan world survives beneath the cross, then the idea of a clean divide between Rome and Greece, between pagan and Christian, would crumble. It would mean that Rome never truly conquered Greece. It would mean the empire of the sword fell, but the empire of the mind endured. And what if, deep in those archives, lies something even more unsettling, a record, perhaps, of an ancient prophecy shared among Greek mystics, that the empire which swallows all others will one day be undone by the knowledge it sought to suppress, that the conqueror's greatest sin will not be violence, but ignorance. History, after all, is not just written by the victors, it is hidden by them. Rome's conquest of Greece was not a single war. It was a transformation of culture, of spirit, of destiny. Greece gave Rome its soul. Rome gave Greece its eternity. Together, they forged the foundations of the Western world. Reason and empire, philosophy and faith, forever intertwined. And yet, even now, the question remains. What still lies hidden are the truths of the ancient philosophers, the mysteries of Delphi, the Gospels never canonized, all waiting in the dark, preserved beneath marble floors and guarded by silence. Perhaps one day those doors will open. Perhaps the world will see that behind every empire, every religion, every myth, there is one continuous flame, the search for truth. The same truth that once burned in the hearts of Greek thinkers, then in the minds of Roman scholars, and now in the questions we still dare to ask. So when we speak of how Rome conquered Greece, perhaps we are telling the wrong story. For in the end, the sword rusts, the marble cracks, and the empire fades. But ideas never die, and somewhere, behind the sealed walls of the Vatican, amid the dust of forgotten scrolls, the whispers of Greece still echo, soft, eternal, and defiant, reminding the world that the conqueror was, and always will be, the conquered. Before you go, think about this. Rome conquered Greece with iron and fire, but Greece conquered Rome with thought and spirit. And perhaps that struggle still shapes the world we live in. If history hides secrets this deep, what else lies buried beneath the marble halls of power? If you want to uncover the hidden side of history, the stories they never wanted you to know, then don't just watch. Join the search. Subscribe to Unsolved History, where the past still speaks, and every legend hides a truth waiting to be found. Because history is never truly silent.